What's up guys, my name is Ace, and welcome back to another gun guide. This is the series where I go into great detail with all of the stats of every one of the weapons in Modern Warfare. And in today's episode, we're going to be moving on to the brand new Renetti pistol that was added with Season 3 of the Battle Pass. So first up, as always, let's have a look at the damage profile. Now its damage profile is identical to the damage profile of the M19. So we deal less damage to the limbs, and then a little bit more damage to the lower torso, and then more damage to the upper torso, and you can see all the values there. But generally speaking, this gun is going to be a 3 to 4 shot kill as long as you're not shooting them in the limbs. As for headshots, we've got that excellent headshot multiplier, just like with the M19. This literally doubles your damage from the lower torso values, and that gives us a headshot damage profile of 72, 60, 50. This means that headshots are often going to make this a 2-shot kill. Even if it's just 1 shot to the body and then 1 shot to the head, it will be a 2-shot kill, at least up close. As for our rate of fire cap, this is once again identical to the M19 at 331 rounds per minute. Now I will say the triggers behave a little bit different than the M19, and I'll get into that later in the video, but just know the base rate of fire is exactly the same, and this means our base time to kill is also exactly the same at 362 milliseconds up close and 543 at longer ranges. This isn't a super competitive time to kill when you put it up against primary weapons, for instance. However, if you manage to get that 2-shot kill by landing a shot to the head, this takes our time to kill down to 181 milliseconds, which is now very competitive. It's extremely fast, actually. As for our ranges, it's not really amazing in this department by any means, but you can see there we have 2 different 3-shot kill ranges, and that first 3-shot kill range, that's going to apply to anywhere in the torso, whereas the second 3-shot kill range, you do have to be hitting upper torso shots in order to get that 3-shot kill. Then beyond that, it's going to be a 4-shot kill out to infinity, unless you're getting those headshots mixed in. Now just as a comparison, I put this side by side with the other lightweight pistols or lower caliber pistols. And as you can see, it's got slightly better range values than the M19. It's more along the lines of what the X16 has. As for suppressors, once again, that oil can suppressor is bugged out. It states that it increases your range, but this is not true. It decreases your range by 15%. Then the lightweight suppressor, that will decrease your range by 25%. And then finally, the monolithic suppressor, that gives you just a 7.5% increase to your range. This brings us into hardcore, which, as you can see here, we have a guaranteed 1-shot kill potential within our first damage range. Then the second damage range, anywhere in the lower torso, upper torso, or head is going to be a 1-shot kill. And then after that, it's always going to be a 2-shot kill, unless you're hitting them in the head. If you hit that headshot, it's a 1-shot kill out to infinity. Next up, we have hipfire, and no surprises here, the Renetti is right in line with the other lightweight pistols. And the next thing we want to look at is our idle sway, which, as you can see here, there is a little bit of movement while aiming down sight. This might impact your ability to hit a super precise shot at long ranges, but generally speaking, within pistol ranges, this shouldn't be a problem for you. Next, we've got recoil, and as you can see here, this thing is very, very accurate. You've got a super tight group here, at least for the ranges that you should be challenging people in, but you can actually stretch pretty surprisingly far with this gun, just because it is so accurate. Moving on to handling, our aim down sight time is pretty standard for the lightweight pistols at 150 milliseconds, and our sprint out time is very fast at 133 milliseconds. However, our tactical sprint out time, or super sprint out time, this is a little bit slower, but still extremely fast at 184 milliseconds. Our magazine capacity is just slightly lower than the M19 at 15 rounds with 30 in reserve, and our reload add time is very fast at just 1.03 seconds. Now, even though that is really fast, if you wanted to speed that up even more, you could use sleight of hand, which will cut that all the way down to 0.77 seconds, which is nearly instant. But at the same time, I'd say not necessary because the standard reload is just so fast. Now, finally, for base stats, our movement speed is 102.5%, which is just slightly slower than the M19. It's just 0.5% slower. And our aim down sight strafe speed is the same as the M19 at 74%. So that's pretty much it for the base stats of the Renetti, although one other thing to mention is, just like with the M19, this thing has very slow bullet velocity by default without attachments. And what this means is challenging people at longer ranges can often be difficult, especially if they're moving around, just because it takes a while for your bullet to get there. So if you aren't using any attachments to help with bullet velocity, you probably want to make sure to keep your gunfights up close and personal with this gun. But now that we have that covered, let's get into the unique attachments. And the first thing we're going to look at are the barrel attachments. And the first one is the Mark I competition barrel. And with this one, it gives you improved aim down sight speed, which is 1 frame faster at 60 FPS. So your new aim down sight time is 133 milliseconds, which is completely unnecessary in my opinion. And the stated con to this is a loss of bullet velocity, which also decreases our damage range by 20%, which is a very noticeable reduction. And as a result, I would never consider using this barrel. You don't need to improve the aim down sight time of this gun. It's already incredible in that department, and you definitely don't want to be reducing your range by 20%, so just stay away from this barrel. The next barrel, though, is the Mark I Extended Barrel, and with this one, we get a 20% increase to our damage range, which is awesome. We've also got improved bullet velocity, so it's easier to hit those moving targets at longer ranges. And on top of that, we get added recoil control, which, if we have a look at it side by side right here, you can see maybe a very slight improvement to your recoil, but it's not that big of a deal. It doesn't make that much of a difference based on what we can see here. Just know that it is helping a little bit in this department. As for the downsides to this, first up, our aim down sight time is slowed down by about 2 frames at 60 FPS, so it's now going to be 184 milliseconds, which is a noticeable reduction, but we've still got a very fast aim down sight time. And on top of that, our overall movement speed is reduced by 2%. So with this barrel, we get some really solid upsides, but we also get some pretty noticeable downsides to it. So you really just have to consider what you're looking for in the gun. Now there is one more barrel, and this is the burst barrel. I decided I'm going to save that towards the end of the video because it basically turns it into a whole new gun, and I want to cover that properly. So until then, let's briefly hop into the stock attachments. The first stock that we have access to is the FTAC Status CS3 stock, and with this one, we get improved recoil control, which if we have a look at it right here, we can see a noticeable improvement to our recoil. Again, this gun's already really accurate without any attachments, so I'm not sure this is necessary, but it does help a little bit. Additionally, we get improved aim walking steadiness and aiming stability, which this gun doesn't really need in my opinion. As for the downsides, our aim down sight time is going to be about 2 frames slower at 184 milliseconds, and our aim down sight strafe speed is reduced by 20%, which is a massive reduction to our aim down sight speed. And therefore, when looking at this, I just don't see how the upsides could possibly make up for these downsides, and I wouldn't recommend using this stock. As for the next one, this is the CSX stock, and with this one, again, we get all of the same benefits, just to varying degrees. So with our recoil control, with this one, you can definitely see a more noticeable improvement to our recoil. This is the best you can get when it comes to recoil from a single attachment. And once again, we also get that added aiming stability and aim walking steadiness. However, the downsides are, once again, a loss to our aim down sight speed. This is the same aim down sight speed we'd get with the other stock at 184 milliseconds, and our aim walking movement speed with this one is reduced by 30% rather than 20%, so you are going to be limited quite a bit in your ability to strafe side to side in a gunfight. Having said that though, if I was going to choose one of these two stocks, I would go with the second one, because at least that one has a very, very noticeable reduction to your recoil. But again, that's more for a specialty role. Most of the time, the recoil for this gun is just fine without any attachments needed. Now this brings us to the magazine attachments, and the first one is the 21 round extended mag, and with this one, there is no measurable impact to your aim down sight speed, even though they mentioned that it reduces your aim down sight speed. However, we do get a slight reduction to our movement speed at about 1.5%. As for the next one, this one is the 27 round extended mag, and with this one, there is a very slightly noticeable reduction to your aim down sight speed, so your new aim down sight time is just 1 frame slower at 60 FPS, which gives us 167 milliseconds for our aim down sight time. And our movement speed is reduced by a very noticeable 3.5%. As a result, I tend to go more with the 21 round mags instead of the 27 round mags, just because there's less noticeable downsides, and 21 rounds is more than enough to deal with multiple enemies. So finally, before we get into the burst, we have the triggers to go over, and the lightweight trigger will improve our fire rate up to 440 rounds per minute, which, keep in mind, this isn't as much of an improvement as you would get with the M19's lightweight trigger. So technically speaking, the M19 has a higher fire rate potential than the Renetti by a little bit. This is still going to be a nice improvement, and I still highly recommend using the lightweight trigger here. As for the heavy duty trigger, this cuts it down to 305 rounds per minute, which isn't as much of a downside either as the M19's heavy trigger. And then finally, the match grade trigger will give us a decent boost to our rate of fire, up to 377 rounds per minute. Overall though, I just always stick with the lightweight trigger. So finally, this brings us into the burst mod, which is in the barrel attachments for the Renetti, and this turns it into a 3-round burst, and within the burst itself, we get a crazy rate of fire at about 1,000 to 1,200 rounds per minute. It's basically impossible to calculate that perfectly accurately with hand testing, but it is extremely fast within the burst itself, and then there's a burst delay of 184 milliseconds based on my testing. This means that our time to kill potential to the body while using the burst mod is 133 milliseconds, which is nearly instant, and this is going to decimate almost anything up close aside from shotguns. Now, if you don't manage to get the one burst kill, your time to kill does drop off to 384 milliseconds, which is basically what our standard time to kill would be to the body if we weren't using the burst attachment, so you can clearly see the time to kill benefit for using this burst mod. Now, the only stated con to this is a loss of recoil control, which if we have a look at it right here, this is something that you clearly have to be aware of while using the burst. This gun isn't super viable at longer ranges now. If you put that burst attachment on there, you really got to keep yourself up close and personal. Otherwise, you're not going to be landing all 3 bullets within a burst. On top of that recoil reduction though, I did discover that our overall range values were reduced by 15% while using this barrel as well. So that's just one more thing to consider. If you're using the burst mod, you've got to play a little bit closer than you would if you weren't using the burst mod. It's also worth noting that the trigger attachments do stack with this burst mod. They do work properly, and they actually seem to improve not only the rate of fire within the burst, but also the burst delay. So I definitely recommend using the lightweight trigger combined with the burst to get those bursts out as fast as possible. And therefore, even if you do require that second burst, your time to kill is going to be fairly competitive. So that pretty much covers it for the stats. Now I just want to share some of my favorite attachment setups with this. And the first attachment setup is assuming we're using this as just a regular semi-auto pistol. And with this, I do like using that extended barrel, mainly for the bullet velocity improvement, honestly. I really like that I can challenge people a bit more comfortably at longer ranges while using this barrel, so it gives us some nice benefits. And I also really like a monolithic suppressor, so I can be stealthy while playing with this. I often like running an optic on this for some reason. I think the iron sights are just fine. I've got no problem with the iron sights, but there's something about it where I just feel more comfortable with an optic equipped. Also, I like those 21 round extended mags, and of course, the lightweight trigger. That's a no-brainer for me. That lightweight trigger has to be on there every single time. So that's the typical sort of boring setup if you're just using this as a regular semi-auto, and I do prefer this over the M19. It's actually my favorite pistol to use like this. However, another way that's a lot of fun to use this is with the burst mod and the akimbo weapon perk combined. This makes this as powerful as a shotgun up close, and you can really deal a lot of damage with this. And with this particular setup, I would use a 5mm laser, lightweight trigger once again, so I get those bursts out as fast as possible, and then also the 21 round magazine. Now, if you are using this as a primary weapon, just be sure to use a 9mm SMG like the MP5, for instance, with the fully loaded perk on that, and that will give you a massive ammo pool that you spawn with for your pistol. But with that pretty much covers it for the gun guide on the Renetti. As for my thoughts on this pistol, I honestly think it's the best pistol in the game now. It's a little bit better than the M19 overall if you're just using it as a normal pistol. And then the addition of the burst mod, which I love, by the way. I'm so glad they finally added that. I find it to just be a really enjoyable secondary weapon to use. The one thing that actually worries me is they'll end up nerfing this. I don't want them to nerf the Renetti. I would much prefer if they actually gave the other pistols a slight buff, or at least the lightweight pistols, maybe not the Desert Eagle, but the other pistols, I think if anything, they should be brought up a little bit more to the level of the Renetti, rather than seeing this Renetti nerfed, because it is clearly the best pistol, at least in my eyes, and I know there's a lot of people that agree with me on this. So yeah, that's just my thoughts on that. But of course, I'd like to know in the comment section below, what do you guys think about the Renetti? Do you agree with me? Do you think this is one of the best pistols in the game? And also, what do you guys think of that burst attachment? Do you like using this with or without the burst? Just let me know those thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.